Governor, Breton has co-produced major features including Avatar and Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, and produced The Road to El Dorado and Universal's Minion Mayhem, earning both Annie and VES awards. At Digital Domain, she oversaw VFX for True Lies, Apollo 13, and Terminator 2 3D. She also produced VFX for Dick Tracy, Solaris, which we're screening at the end of August, and Master and Commander, and associate produced Star Trek 4 through 6. Please join me in welcoming Brooke to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate a landmark achievement in cinema, James Cameron's The Abyss. Released in 1989, The Abyss broke new ground in visual storytelling, earning the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects in 1990. It introduced one of the first truly photorealistic CGI characters, the now iconic water tentacle, created in Industrial Light and Magic. That sequence was a turning point, not just for this film, but for the entire visual effects industry. It paved the way for what came next: Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, and the digital age of cinema. But what makes The Abyss so remarkable is how it seamlessly blended digital innovation with hands-on artistry. There were the meticulously crafted miniatures, shot by Pete Romano, and the groundbreaking underwater cinematography led by Mikhail Solomon, filmed inside a repurposed nuclear reactor tank. It was an ambitious, physically demanding shoot that pushed the limits of what filmmaking could be. The visual effects team, including Dennis Muren, John Bruno, Dennis Skotek, and Hoyt Yateman, didn't just create effects, they created a visual language that was experimental and unforgettable. And none of it would have been possible without the bold, visionary leadership of producer Gale Anne Hurd, who we are honored to have with us here tonight. At a time when producing big budget films was still very much a boys' club, Gale Anne Hurd stormed the gates. She didn't just break barriers, she built new worlds. With The Terminator, Aliens, and The Abyss, Gale helped redefine science fiction and action cinema for a generation. Her collaborations with James Cameron gave us stories that were epic in scale, but deeply human. Films where strength and vulnerability coexisted, and where women were both heroes and survivors. But Gale's legacy isn't only what we see on screen. It's what she's made possible behind the scenes. She has an extraordinary eye for talent and a deep instinct for recognizing and empowering visionary artists. The filmmakers, technicians, and creators she's championed have gone on to reshape the industry itself. Gale has built environments where risk, experimentation, and creativity aren't just allowed, they're expected. From producing groundbreaking films to launching one of the most successful shows in television history, The Walking Dead, to mentoring the next generation of storytellers, Gale Anne Hurd has remained unwavering in her integrity, her courage, and her belief in what is possible. She is not just a producer, she's a pioneer, a mentor, and a true force of nature. Please join me in welcoming the extraordinary Gale Anne Hurd.
I'm glad I'm not wearing mascara. I might have cried after that introduction. Thank you, Brooke, for that lovely introduction. We are here tonight, though, to celebrate the remarkable achievements of the Academy Award-winning visual effects team on The Abyss. Bravo to all of them and to their teams on an Oscar truly well-deserved. The film would never have been made without Jim Cameron's remarkable vision and 20th Century Fox's willingness to back it. Of course, we neglected to tell them that the technology to bring the story to life didn't actually exist. Nor did an underwater filming tank capable of achieving the live action sequences, little things like that. Imagine the impossible hurdles those two problems posed, and then multiply them by the limited amount of time and money available to us. It's a testament not only to Jim, but to the entire team of brilliant crew members we assembled to bring the film to life, that the film was even made. In addition to the rightly lauded VFX, we worked with commercial dive helmet manufacturers, Western Space and Marine, to devise and construct the dive helmets that enabled the viewer and all of you to see the actors' faces. Our sound mixer, Lee Orloff, supervised the design and building of the helmet microphones the actors actually wore underwater so that he could record their voices within these newly invented helmets. Having to supervise the design and construction of a 7.5 million gallon filming tank and an auxiliary 1.5 million gallon tank, both with heated and filtered water, that would enable us to shoot the film underwater in an uncompleted nuclear reactor facility in Gaffney, South Carolina, found, by the way, by underwater cameraman Al Giddings, was not on anyone's bingo card. But that's exactly what we did. And then, how do you light the underwater sequences when the electrical equipment required to do so didn't even exist at the time? Well, you hire the lighting experts, Pete Romano, and Richard Mula to work with cinematographer Mikhail Solomon, overseen as always by Jim, to invent and build them. And given the demands of the underwater shoot, we worked with the late Dr. Peter Bennett of Diver Alert Network to develop specialized scuba tables, including decompression stops to keep the cast and crew safe. Jim spent more time underwater than anyone else, so we also devised a way for him to watch dailies underwater while off-gassing. And then we proved that the tech behind breathing liquid oxygen, or PFC, oxygenated perfluorocarbon, was real. When Beanie the rat breathes it on screen, in actuality, and survives. Luckily, and I'm sure he's quite grateful, Ed Harris, who plays Bud Brigman, didn't have to do that himself. Although I'm sure Jim would have preferred that. Speaking of filming underwater, we had to get the actors trained and certified in scuba, which we did in the Cayman Islands, thankfully providing Jim, myself, and the actors a brief respite during pre-production. We sourced and rented the underwater remote-operated vehicle, while the late production designer, Les Dilley, worked with Jim to design and build sets in a tank that wasn't even close to being finished yet. Throw in the fact that we couldn't control the weather and had to contend with summer lightning storms, not to mention a facility provider who tried to evict us when we wouldn't pay his extortionate rental price increase in violation of our signed contract. On top of producing a film with at least 5 simultaneous filming units, I then had to work with Fox to hire a local constitutional attorney to defend us. And yes, we won. Honestly, I'm having PTSD at the moment. And remember, we had 6-day work weeks because we were on location. And incredibly long hours, so it's no surprise that all of us working on the BIS quickly began referring to it as the abuse. Nonetheless, it was and remains a truly remarkable achievement in filmmaking across the board, with a riveting, character-driven story brought to life not only by the brilliant technical achievements required to make it a reality, but also by a truly stellar cast. If you haven't watched Under Pressure, Making the Abyss, and you're interested in seeing even more of the behind the scenes, it'll give you a great deal more insight into the challenges the crew and cast faced on a daily basis. While I'd like to thank everyone on the crew by name, since we don't have the time, could all of the cast and crew in the audience here tonight stand so that we can applaud your heroic achievements? And I can take this right away. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for coming tonight. And I think you're in for a real treat. And next, you'll be hearing from Academy Award winner, visual effects supervisor, and I worked with him also as a director, John Bruno.
The Abyss, storyboards. So, where to start? Basically, the Abyss would use traditional visual effects, miniatures, matte paintings, rear projection, and stop motion techniques with one thing added. It would all be shot underwater, 25 to 55 feet deep, and use 70 millimeter rear projection, wet for wet techniques that required no mats. And as Gale said, to work on the film, you had to be a certified diver. So early in 1987, I started storyboard and design work with Jim Cameron when he was still working on the script. During that time, we tossed ideas around on how to do shots we were doing. And from the beginning, he wanted the Abyss to be a benchmark of total realism on every level, filming realistic conditions underwater or on the screen whenever possible. And this was the era before computer-generated graphics. They all had to be done camera. And for the record, oxygenated fluorocarbon emulsion is real. These are big ideas, and the pseudopod was a bigger idea, and we really didn't know how to do that. At one point on Poltergeist, I had used replacement animation for a scene where a hand stretches out of a television screen and morphs into animated ectoplasm. We sculpted that hand in I think it was wax casting, and there was 26 frames. The first second, it just popped out of the screen. Didn't make it into the movie, but this was not, thinking about it, this was not a way to do this, and we just had no idea. So we contacted Phil Tippett, and Jim asked Phil if it was possible to use something like claymation or painted black and project images of rippling water over the motion as it was working, as it was moving. He kind of rejected that idea and recommended we talk to Dennis Muren. We did. Dennis considered computer animation a better option, but we were leery of that because at the time there weren't great examples of realistic animation. This was 1987. We take it for granted now. There was also the cost. So there were many other problems facing us. That was just one of them that we thought Well, if anybody can do it, ILM can. I worked there. We all worked there at one point. We didn't think anybody else had an approach, so they were assigned the sequence. Now, Jim wanted to shoot as much in camera as possible, including large models and miniature. Self-illuminating models afforded us the ability to move, change camera position, and shoot again. Water doesn't scale, so whatever ships we'd build, it would have to be very large. So Steve Berg designed the Benthic Explorer, a twin-hulled surface support vessel. It was supposed to be 450 feet long that supplied power and air to a movable drilling platform, deep core, 1,700 feet below. When it was finally built, we would shoot in the open ocean with that miniature. 42 feet long miniature, 10th scale. It was a real twin hull ship that could pound through the waves. In the story, the ship would lose power and control in a hurricane, causing the crane to collapse and drop down onto the deep core 1,700 feet below and drag it to the edge of the abyss. So for that sequence, if we could have, Jim really wanted me to go out with a camera in a hurricane and film it. Serious. Almost. Well, anyway, in Westport, Washington, we did manage to tow the 42-foot Benthic out into 20-foot seas in a 50-knot gale. We were filming and kept filming while the U.S. Coast Guard chased us down and led us back into port. That footage is in the movie that you're about to see. It's all the Benthic stuff. And for the opening scene, there's another great moment. The Montana nuclear submarine slams into a rocky cliff wall. Its pressure hull ruptures and the vessel slides deep into the Cayman Trench, landing on a rocky outcropping. Again, to ensure realism, Jim sent me and cameraman Bill Neal with Montana storyboards to Grand Cayman Island, where we rented 2 submersibles and dove down 800 feet to the wreck of the Kirk Pride, which was a 278-foot cargo ship that sank and rolled down an incline to get hung up on a rocky outcropping with a 6,000-foot drop beneath it. We used 2 submersibles to stage and photograph the entire Montana sequence for real. The visibility at that depth was 300 feet, meaning if you saw the 600-foot Montana, you can only see half of it. And the water color at that depth was a very, very deep blue. So this excursion established scale and color for the film that everybody worked off of. Lars Anderson, a friend of ours, who later came up with the Hydro Cow, was a Hudson sprayer filled with Tidy Bowl Blue and milk. Was used when shooting miniatures to match scale and color for the reference material. You had to blend it up so all the live action and the miniatures had the same overall look. And for bubbles, we used Alka-Seltzer. The Abyss, for The Abyss, we set up our own visual effects production company with Jim and Gale. I headed up 2 main units, ocean surface unit and underwater unit. The effects team we put together was led by my effects producer, Laura Buff, who I know is here tonight, another ILM and Boss Film alumni. She kept 9 effects companies and model shops, Wonderworks and design centers on schedule, sort of. Handling effects photography for our ocean and surface units was Bill Neal, and handling the underwater effects was Pete Romano, whose underwater housings were built specially to handle the VistaVision 70mm cameras. 70mm cameras. I had worked with Pete and Bill at ILM and Boss Film, both. Pete and Rich Mula also supplied the experimental HMI power lights that were used to light flatbed and deep core. They lit the whole show. And we did all our rear screen process shots, which are many, in 70mm. I'd like to give a shout out to a production team. Laura, thank you. Production manager Julie Gibson, Mike Chambers was our coordinator. Miller Drake, visual effects editor, and our art department was Phil Norwood and Steve Berg. Pat McClung was our in-house miniature supervisor, who taught me everything I need to know about miniatures. And Jennifer Bell worked in our unit. I was told that was her first job. And Van Ling worked in between the units. It was basically my job to make sure that shots and sequences looked like they all were produced by one shop, one facility, and didn't differ from principal photography. So, and then it was Pete Romano who recommended Walt Conte, I'm sorry, couldn't be here tonight, but who had done radio-controlled whales in Star Trek III. Proposed building a quarter-scale radio-controlled flatbed and cab one for the sub-chase, this big fight battle at the, near the end of the movie. These were like 4 feet square, but they were big, and 400-pound battery-powered subs that could run into things, take hits repeatedly. They were self-illuminating and fast, affording us the ability to move camera, change positions, and then shoot again, just like live action. Gee. No compositing. Pete Romano started filming in Gaffney, South Carolina, and then Jim and Mikhail Solomon did additional shooting at the USC Olympic Pool. How about that? Here in LA. And then, in the setup of this whole film, one day Hoyt Yeatman from DreamQuest Images came by the office with a proposal to build a gantry crane to shoot the Montana search sequence, which is a very key and important sequence of the movie. Hoyt developed a gantry crane system that would hang models from the stage ceiling. The model submarines would travel on a repeatable motion-controlled track suspended on wires from above over a 70-foot miniature of the crash Montana. More like a diorama. It's like the whole size of the stage. It was built by Design Center, Dan Goldberg. The submersibles would be large enough to hold specially built miniature 35mm rear projectors of the actors moving within. And the submersibles themselves would light the scene. When you see this, it's pretty spectacular. It's one of my favorite sequences in the movie because it intercuts perfectly with live action and full-size submarines. DreamQuest was awarded that sequence, but one of my favorite sequences of the film, of course, for me, since I designed it, is the crane collapse, shot by Bob and Denny Skotak. They also shot a forced perspective launch of Cab 1. It was all in camera. There was a tank 14 feet above the stage. With above that was the Cab 1 miniature. And actors were down on the stage and they were all lined up in perspective, and he launched this thing. It looked like it fell through the bottom of the boat, but forced perspective shots, all in camera, no compositing. So the crane crash was this large miniature shot against rear screen projection again of the storm footage that we'd shot. Dump tanks, rain, and wind smoke machines were added to realism, and then once it collapsed through the moon pool, it was picked up by Pete Romano, again, for the underwater portion of the crane crashing underwater, landing 30 feet away from deep core, which is a really fun sequence, dragging it to the edge of the abyss. The Maniships were shot by Alex Funke at DreamQuest. And then Steve Johnson, X-Effects, built the translucent NTI, Aliens. Gene Warren from Fantasy 2 Film Effects and his son Chris, I think Chris is here tonight. We're sorry to say that Gene is another one of our crew who's passed away a few years back. And he worked with Jim from starting on Terminator and Gale. But they would handle the NTI Ark ship rising to the surface that was shot in they filmed in the Salton Sea. Now the pseudopod, which is why you're here. It's the first totally realistic, digitally created element, not a creature, but a tentacle of water moving through physical space, reflecting its environment, casting shadows, interacting with the characters. James Cameron was so worried about how this would look, he said if it didn't work, he would cut it out of the movie. So now I'd like to introduce you to my friend, John Knoll, who's here to explain how it was done.
Thank you. I've John Knoll. I'm here to represent the computer graphics effort on this show, which was a whopping total, I think, of 23 shots in the film, rendered at a glorious 1K resolution. While I'm here to talk about the computer graphics, I just want to say that I think the rest of the work in this show, the radio control underwater submarines, the marionette rigs, it happened at Dream Quest, the large boats on the Salton Sea, the aliens, that's some of the most beautiful, astoundingly great looking work. I think it still holds up really great today. I feel honored to have been part of that kind of amazing effort. All right, so my exposure to this picture started after Dennis Murin had talked to Jim about doing some of the work on this, and they had done a really quick test of the pseudopod where they just very quickly, all right, we're going to stay up all night. And I think Jay Riddle put together a test just to illustrate that we were serious about this and that we really wanted to do the work. I came on a little bit later. I had been working with Dennis for years as a motion control camera operator, and I had sort of acquired a reputation as being somebody who's very production focused of, what does it take to get the shot done and to make sure that we stay on schedule. And Dennis asked if I would move over to the computer graphics department to keep an eye on that work. So my first exposure to what we were doing, if we can put up the first slide, was just in reading the script. And you read this, and it paints a pretty good picture, but how the heck are we going to do that? And it actually gets a little worse here if I go to the next page, where forms a face that's recognizable on the end. So we did a really quick proof of concept of what this would just the simple part without a face on it could look like. If I jump ahead here. Next, we saw some storyboards, some beautifully drawn storyboards of what Jim imagined this would all kind of look like. And to help us out a little bit with visualizing this, sorry, let me jump ahead to that. We did a series of sculpted maquettes that we then molded and cast in clear casting resin to help us try to understand photographically what this thing would look like. And then we figured that water is going to be a combination of reflection and refraction. And the plan that we worked out was that for refraction, we were going to use background plates. So I think Mark DePay wrote a RenderMan shader, actually it was pre-RenderMan, it was Rays, a Rays shader that would do a pseudo ray trace to do a lookup into the background plate. So refraction was handled by sort of a distortion, this lookup of the background plate. But for reflection, we needed to see the whole environment around it because in reflection you could see anywhere in the room. So, and this was the day before Jim came to visit ILM. We did this, put together a quick test. It's 24 frame long, partly to show that we were serious about wanting to do this work. Well, let me jump ahead too. All right, so this is me back 35 years ago as a kid. One of my jobs on the show was to essentially be the match mover, the data recorder. So I went and talked to the art department and got Xerox reduced blueprints of all the sets that we were going to be on. And then every camera setup that we were doing, I would take measurements of where the camera was, distance from this wall, and I would annotate them all onto Xerox copies of this, of the blueprints. So I was essentially what today is a data wrangler. I brought along a still camera, and as we were shooting, I would photograph the set, trying to get all directions. And as everyone is familiar, a movie set is typically only lit in one direction. So you shoot, when we're shooting this way, If you turn this way, it's the film crew, it's lights, it's everything. So when we were lit for this direction, I would get in there with the camera and I would take pictures in that direction. And when we reversed to do the other direction, I would get those. And then I was about a year and a half into a little side project, a development on Photoshop. And I used an early version of Photoshop to take all those images that I was shooting on set and to stitch them together into reflection environments. And these are a few of those reflection environments that I made, trying to make something that didn't have movie equipment behind the camera. So these are what you see reflected in the pod. And these were, I think, 1K by 1K squares that made up the, that was about as much space as I could afford. So there you go, there's my reflection environments. And the way these work, is, you know, these essentially fold up into a box, and then you see the you know, stuff reflected off the surface and refracted through it. Later on in the sequence, the pseudopod forms faces of Lindsay and of Bud, and to do that, we scanned the actors on a cyberware digitizer. So this is at Walt Disney Imagineering that had one of these. So we got the actors there, and that's me on the left, and then Jim in the middle there, and Van Lang on the right. And I've now forgotten the name. It's a guy who worked at Walt Disney Imagineering that, you know, they owned the scanner, so he was operating it. And that is us scanning Ed Harris in the rig there. So the idea for how are we going to do animated faces on the pseudopod, the thought was that we were going to do this 3D scan of their head. And I thought that we should scan sort of every major expression that they went through, essentially as keyframes. So I asked Jim to direct the actors doing what the pod was meant to be doing. You know, show me what you expect to see the performance of the pod doing. So we had Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth go through the performance of what they were doing on the pod. Then I took that, and they cut that into the film. And then I looked at that footage and I figured out what should be keyframes. I need this expression, I need this expression, this expression, and this expression. And I got it down to something like 12 expressions that were needed. And we scheduled with the actors and we got them down to the cyberware digitizer and we scanned them in all those different positions. And then I used a morphing program that Doug Smythe had written for Willow to take the unwrapped cyberware data, which is a sort of a cylindrical height field, and to morph those together so that they would smoothly transition. And that's what we used for the facial animation on the pod. Let's see, I think that was my last slide. I don't have a load of documentation of this because this was so long ago, but it was really a great deal of fun to work on this project. You know, there weren't a lot of set methodologies for the things that we were doing. A lot of them were just kind of, well, what do you think? How should we do this? And we do it. And some of those things, like the way we document match moves and that kind of thing, eventually became industry standards. So we worked for, I think, 7 months to do 23 shots. It seemed like it was a lot of work at the time, but it seems so trivial now. So I'm almost a little embarrassed to be here representing that work, especially compared to the amazing stuff that's in the rest of the film that I hope you will all enjoy. So I want to say big thanks to the Academy for sponsoring us doing this. Big thanks to Gale and John, and enjoy the movie.